Well, welcome to another Friday night. I want to start a new little series today on the challenges for people with complex trauma to have a job, to return to work, to be in different types of jobs, and then also for people who are employers who don't understand complex trauma to be aware of some of the challenges that they might face in hiring somebody with more severe complex trauma. What stands out to me as I learn and have studied complex trauma for years is many people with complex trauma, they can adapt and they can become quite functional in society, even successful. And so many people with complex trauma can use a lot of their coping strategies to actually look like they're very good employees. But as stress builds, it's going to begin to affect them, and they're going to resort to other coping strategies that are eventually going to hurt them and hurt others. So what we have seen is complex trauma is relationship trauma. And so you don't see some of the coping strategies unless the person is in a more intimate relationship where there's the need to be open, the need to connect, the need to deal with stresses and problems in the relationship. Then you begin to see old survival tools and patterns begin to show up. And that's what happens with many people with complex trauma, because work, parenting, and intimate relationships are the three areas where their complex trauma gets triggered the most. So what I have found for many people who come into our program is they really focus on working on themselves for a while. They might even take a break from work, and they just really work on their own issues, understanding their issues, getting new tools, and then they return to work. And all of a sudden they're finding themselves being triggered left and right. And it's like they regress or they stop growing in their recovery. The work environment is just too much for them, and it really starts to set them back. And so what I want to say up front is most of the people that work in our organization have complex trauma, but they're in our organization because they've been working on their complex trauma. And they are some of the most delightful employees you could ever have. I'm so glad that we employ them. I deal with my own complex trauma. And so I'm not saying in this thing at all that people with complex trauma make terrible employees. If they're working on their complex trauma, they can be some of the best employees that you could ever have. But what I am saying is they do come with challenges that you won't get from an employee that doesn't have more severe complex trauma. And so they can be wonderful employees, but if they get triggered, they can really become challenging employees. Challenging as far as being an employee, but also within their own body to themselves. And then if they get promoted to a position of leadership, a position of authority, it can set off even greater triggers, and they can be drawn to resort to coping patterns and tools that can be quite harmful to others and themselves. So it's a new layer of challenge for them. So when I was thinking about doing this little series, I thought I'm going to go back through the 90 characteristics of complex trauma that we've amassed over the years and just look at which of those characteristics really can be an issue for people in their jobs. And I ended up with quite a lengthy list, and we're going to gradually work our way through it. So it's important to say up front that most anybody that gets a job, whether they're super healthy or not, they're going to have challenges. They're not just going to breeze through the job. Every job will have a challenge. So we're not saying that people with complex trauma are the only one that's going to experience challenges. Everybody does. But it's people with complex trauma that it takes the challenges they experience to a new level and makes it even more challenging for them. The final thing I want to say before we dig in is this. The first characteristics I want to look at, what you're going to see is the adaptations the child had in complex trauma to survive actually makes them look like a wonderful employee. They're basically a workaholic. They're a people pleaser. They are an ideal employee. And so you're going to be so pleased with them, but down the road, you're going to start to see issues. They're going to burn out. They're going to have other things that begin to surface. And so the reason why I want to do this series is to help people realize that complex trauma and the maladaptations that a child had to do to survive can actually make them initially a fantastic employee. It's later on that other issues begin to erode their effectiveness on the job and to begin to hurt them as they head towards burnout. So let's look at some of the potential challenges that a person with complex trauma is going to have as they go to work. So let me begin with, you're going to go to a new job. So here's what I want you to understand. You're going to a new job, which is basically an unknown. And what I mean by that is your brain, your nervous system, doesn't know if this job is safe or not. Are there going to be bullies there? Is the boss a narcissist? Is it going to be a very demanding, harsh place to work? They don't know any of that. It's all unknown. But what does the brain of a complex trauma person assume? It assumes danger. So anything that's unknown, a brand new job, there's got to be some danger here. So I need to be on guard. I need to be into my sympathetic vagal state, ready to fight or flight. So just going to a new job triggers the tendency within the nervous system to assume this is going to be dangerous and to go to old patterns of how I would deal with danger. So right from day one, you're already being drawn into old patterns. Now let me just add a piece here. What will happen for some people is they get to a new job, they resist those patterns, but then they find out that the job is unsafe. There's a lot of backstabbing, a lot of gossip, there's a bully on the job, there's a narcissistic boss, whatever. It's not a safe place to work. It's much like their family of origin. Now they're in survival mode at work because it's not safe, but they want to live by healthy tools. That's going to be a really big challenge, and we'll come to that later. But it's just realizing up front that if you end up in an unsafe job, you're going to have to make some very important decisions, because to stay in it too long could cause you to just go back to old survival tools, and it's really going to mess up your recovery. But the other piece I want you to understand is that for many people, just going to a new job where there's an unknown is they assume it's unsafe, and that can lead them to all kinds of problems. The second thing that I want you to be aware of is that for most people coming out of complex trauma, where they've been for years in danger, is that they have been in their sympathetic vagal state for years. That's their default setting: fight, flight, extra energy, on guard, hypervigilance, go, 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 perform, 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 don't relax. So when they come into a job, they might have been in their ventrovagal state in recovery, had a real good balance between rest and work, and doing really, really well. Now they get into work, and they have to go into a more energetic place of production, and that pulls them back into, let's go to my sympathetic vagal state. Let's just stay here. Let's just go, go, go. And they're sliding back into a different vagal state, which makes them then quickly a workaholic. They get validated for that. The boss likes them, and then they begin to burn themselves out. So recognize that your default setting from complex trauma, which was your sympathetic vagal state, is the one that is easy to slide back into when you go back to work, and that can cause lots of problems. Now, for some of their complex trauma in childhood came out of some bad teaching. So they were taught that you got to work all the time. You got to be productive all the time. If you relax, if you do self-care, you're being selfish or lazy. You're constantly told that time is precious. You can't waste it. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. You got to make every minute count. All of that was just grilled into you. And so now when you come into work, what you don't realize is that your conscience has been mistrained in childhood, that you have to work constantly to have value. You have to work constantly to not be a bad person. And so you go into work and you work, and you slide into being a workaholic very easily, and you burn yourself out. You lose the right balance between work and rest, work and self-care. So be aware of that. And then another type of bad teaching that some had is a misdefinition of love. So love was taught to them that you put your needs aside. You must be there for everybody. You must sacrifice. You must give. It was basically codependency and fawning were taught as love. And if you didn't constantly say yes to people, give to people, sacrifice for people, you were selfish, you were unloving, you were not a good person. And so again, their conscience was mistrained. So now they go into work with that as their conscience, their beliefs, and they get drawn back into overextending themselves, give, not taking care of themselves, burning out. So that leads to the next one, which is the fawning one. And to me, we've done a whole series on this. It's the ultimate survival strategy of complex trauma. Fight and flight don't work. So you go to freeze, but you still need these people to meet your needs. So you got to learn to fawn. You got to learn to get them to like you. So you learn to read their moods, their beliefs. You learn to read their vagal states, and then you shapeshift. You become what they want. You lose yourself, but you become what they want so that they'll respect you, they'll like you, hopefully they'll meet your needs. So that is how most children in complex trauma had to survive. So when you go back into work and now you have a new authority in your life, you are immediately at a subconscious level triggered, I need to please them. If they are going to like me, I need to sacrifice my needs, not stand up for myself, not express what I think or believe or my needs, because then they might not like me because there's an imbalance of authority and power here. So I have to become smaller. I have to shapeshift and become what they want if I'm going to make it in this job. And so many people just automatically do that. As soon as they start a job, they go into fawning. I got to please the boss. I can never say no to the boss. I have to do extra things to gain the boss's approval. I have to please the boss in every situation. So that leads to workaholism. That leads to looking like a wonderful employee. But here's what I want you to understand, especially if you're a boss, is that fawner is acting to your face like they adore you, that you're the greatest boss. And initially, they felt that way. They put you on a pedestal. They did adore you. But they've had to sacrifice their needs over and over again. They've had to neglect themselves. They've had to make sacrifice after sacrifice, but nobody's done that for them. So they've gradually built a resentment towards the boss. They're gradually changing their attitude. So they're acting one thing to your face, but they're feeling something very different internally. There's an increased negativity and anger towards you. And so that can begin to cause problems over time. So let me add something to a person returning to work in light of all of this. So you can go back to all of those old beliefs, coping tools, survival tools, and it looks like you're a wonderful employee. But you're going to burn yourself out. You're eventually going to have all kinds of resentments. When you go back to work, it is so important for you to be able to sit down with yourself initially and say, what are my commitments and priorities? Okay, I have a partner, I have children, I have some exercise I need to do every day, some service opportunities I need to be involved in, some recovery support groups I have to stay connected to. So I got to balance all of those with work. And so I have to be very clear on day one that work is part of my life, but it's not going to run my life. And I have to be able to express, okay, I can't work overtime this weekend because I have other commitments. I can't do this extra thing and stay late because I have a commitment to my kids. You have to be able to stand up for yourself. And if the boss doesn't like that and doesn't respect that, then that's the boss's problem. And you're going to just have more and more trouble if you just keep shape-shifting to please that boss. So give thought to your life, your priorities, your commitments, and make sure that work doesn't have superior priority to your children, your partner, to your other things. If you don't do that, then you will get drawn into fawning, and then it will take over your life, and then your children will be neglected, your partner will be neglected, yourself will be neglected, and your whole recovery will begin to go backwards. Such an important step for people to do. So that's an introduction to the challenges that a person has coming out of complex trauma. I hope it just helps you begin to realize that we all need to build work into our life. That's part of what we have to do to live. But with complex trauma, going to work can create these challenges that can really hurt us, hurt those we love, set us back in recovery unless we're aware of it. And so we need to take steps to be aware of where we're vulnerable, to be aware of what we have to do to resist the pull that we're going to feel when we go back to work. Well, I hope this helps. Look forward to continuing this series. If it did help, please like, subscribe, share, and make a comment. It really helps the algorithm. Thank you very much. Bye now.